She can edit it.
And of course,
Here you go.
I hope so.
I'll tell all the secrets.
I'm sorry?
You want to bear down on
I'm sorry.
this? You can bear down on this.
Oh, you're so compared. Thank you. Oh, I heard you correctly, but I didn't get the meaning of it. Yeah, thank
We use
I'm
that.
mumbling through a mask, it doesn't help.
you. I'm sorry, can you just keep saying what you're saying and I'll continue to willfully not understand you?
All right.
Here you go, thank you, sir.
Okay, we're gonna get started. There is a CE sign-in sheet that's going around. If that can just make its way back to me. I'm going to introduce Courtney, our presenter today. I am Dr. Vanessa Brown. Courtney has been my mentee, my supervisee, my colleague, my research team member. We have a lot of relationships together, and I'm so happy to see her grow in her career. Courtney is a second-year doctorate student at the Michigan School of Psychology, and she serves as one of our Division 32 student ambassadors. She is the secretary for the Inclusion, Diversity, and Equity Alliance, the president of the Psi Chi chapter for Michigan School of Psychology, and she recently founded and serves as the president of the AB Psi Student Circle chapter at Michigan School of Psychology.
Really?
She also serves as the junior student representative for our Division 32 board, the Society for Humanistic Psychology, and is the vice chair of the Michigan Psychological Association's graduate student group. Courtney has a passion for serving marginalized and minoritized populations with a specific interest in the effects of trauma and vicarious trauma, which brought her to begin researching the effects of racial socialization among Black adolescents, Black parents, and Black caregivers. So we'll turn the mic over. Please give her a hand. Courtney Cabell.
Good afternoon, everyone. Please excuse my raspy voice. I was in Orlando and went to Universal earlier this week with my family, so lots of screaming. And the dry air is not helping a bit, but yeah. So I want to start by asking you all a question. Feel free to say your answers out loud. And I just want you to tell me, when you see the quotes that pop up on the screen, what it makes you think of. So.
Eric Gardner.
Okay, Eric Gardner.
George Floyd.
George Floyd.
Franz Fanon.
Mm-hmm.
Be my mother.
Could be her mother.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else?
Innocent.
Innocent? Okay. What if I told you that each of these quotes is the last words that were uttered by Black men as they were being killed by the police? So each year, a disproportionate number of Black Americans are killed by police. Similarly, a disproportionate number of Black women die in childbirth compared to other ethnicities. Phenomenon as these have been cited to sow the seeds of race-based trauma in Blacks. According to Miriam Jernigan and colleagues, racial trauma refers to emotional consequences of distress resulting from racism, racial discrimination, and racial stressors. Examples of these include stereotypes, microaggressions, and barriers to achievement.
Why is that? Click something?
No, it's just. Okay. Does it tell you the code is?
We can talk about it.
Yeah. Okay, instead of doing the poll, we're just gonna talk about it and discuss it as a group. I want everyone to think of some examples of race-based traumatic experiences. And if you have any ideas, you can just say them.
Being followed in the store.
being found in the store.
Being spat at in the street and being told to go back home.
Mm-hmm.
Being stopped by the police.
These are some good examples. So some race-based traumatic experiences reported by Robert Carter include poor quality of medical care due to race. And so people of color have less access to needed care and are less likely to receive needed care. And when they do receive care, care is often poor quality. Another example would be exposure to police violence and brutality against blacks. Police violence and brutality against blacks is a consequence of systemic racism, and indirect exposure to these events have major impacts on mental health. Another example would be denial of housing due to race. And people of color are systematically denied access to housing in certain neighborhoods due to their race. Exclusion and ostracism from groups and events due to race is another example. Black children are often excluded and ostracized by their peers. And then the final one, development of policy intended to perpetuate the superiority of one race or another. So policies are continually being developed which are discriminatory and oppress people of color. So why is all of this important? In 1993, Yet provided the following illustration of how race-based incidents may result in traumatic stress. So one year, when an African-American law school professor was teaching a fellow, she was confronted by a white male student who asked her, "What gives you the right to think you should teach here?" She assumed a similar challenge would not have been made had she been male and white. Indeed, the man who recruited her told her in effect that she would not have been hired had she been white. "I'm not sure you have the power we're looking for," she recalled him saying, in assessing her intellectual ability and her drive. The woman threw herself into her work, but experienced a sense of irrelevance. Yet Kosei noted that her academic struggle was compounded by a sense of being subjected to heightened scrutiny that many blacks call the pressure of being a black person under the microscope. The woman began experiencing migraine headaches and depression, which resulted in her being placed on an anti-seizure medication. In this case, the woman did not experience just one race-based incident, but numerous events over time that compounded on top of each other until the straw broke the camel's back. Eventually, she began re-experiencing through images and thoughts. Her day would be intruded on without warning by flashes of events returning to her consciousness. She began feeling irritable, anxious, experiencing hostility, feeling depressed. She began noticing herself avoiding certain situations that reminded her of her pain, and she was highly reactive to any reminders that she experienced. She also developed high blood pressure. These psychological and somatic experiences are evidence of race-based traumatic stress. So how does this play into racial socialization? According to the American Psychological Association, racial socialization is the way in which parents teach their children to navigate the often contradictory messages that teach them what it is to be black. U.S. parents and caregivers have a responsibility of raising their children with culturally appropriate principles and values, but for black families, there is an added layer. Black parents are tasked with teaching their children how to navigate and survive American society, sometimes highlighting the possibility and anticipation of race-based incidents and traumatic experiences. So there are several racial socialization messages that black parents often communicate to their adolescents regarding race. Some of those include emphasizing having pride in being black, giving warnings about racial inequalities, de-emphasizing the importance of race, taking a colorblind approach, and emphasizing that working hard ensures overcoming racism. Illustrating mistrust of other races and ethnic groups, or choosing to be silent about race and racial issues. So this was gonna be another Slido, but for some reason it's not working, so we can just discuss it as a group. what are some racial socialization messages that you all have heard or experienced?
I don't see color.
I don't see color.
All lives matter.
All lives matter.
Don't trust the police.
Don't trust the
Don't.
police. Yeah. So, racial socialization of Black adolescents is well established in the literature with a good research that supports both quantitative and qualitative research, and states that racial socialization is a protective intervention for Black adolescents. The American Psychological Association reported that youth do not receive many messages about race, do very well psychologically, but their psychological well-being decreases once they do experience racism or discrimination because they aren't prepared for it. Beth Kurtz-Costas and colleagues researched racial pride socialization, or promoting pride in one's race, ethnicity, or culture through the transmission of the messages. They found that the deliberate and unintentional transmission of these messages by Black parents or caregivers to their children and adolescents increased adolescent awareness of racial discrimination, and prepared them for how to respond to those messages. It promoted development of effective coping skills and for dealing with systemic and personal racism. The messages have also been associated with positive self-esteem and academic achievement in Black adolescents. Salim and colleagues posited that racial socialization is a necessary preventative strategy for Black parents, and that racial socialization is an effective tool for safeguarding against racial discrimination and general evaluation of Blacks. They explain that these messages are strength-based coping strategies that is important to the development of Black adolescents. And then Anderson and colleagues noted, racial socialization is generally associated with positive outcomes, which include positive parent-child interactions, academic performance and engagement, decreased behavioral problems, increased psychological well-being, and positive racial identity. But what happens when these messages have negative outcomes, or the messages aren't positive? So I want to do an experiment. Can everyone stand up for me? So I'm gonna say some things, and when you hear something that makes you feel any kind of negative emotion or reaction, I just want you to sit down. Always speak proper English, or they will assume that you don't know anything. Always watch your tone, or they will assume that you're an angry person.
I knew I'd be left up there. Living it.
So I only got through 2 of them, and everyone is already sitting.
Yeah, right.
But there's more.
Oh, yeah.
Avoid wearing your hair in certain styles because they're not considered neat or professional. You're gonna have to work 10 times harder for the same opportunities. Avoid going in certain spaces. You will not be accepted there. If you encounter the police, do exactly what they say. Make sure your hands are visible at all times. Do not talk back. Record the encounter if you can. Do not drive in certain areas. You're more likely to get pulled over there. We are seen as less than, not human. You will never have the same privileges. So these phrases are things that have been said to me by my parents, and other Black parents often say to their children. Does anyone want to speak on what they were thinking as I read these messages, or what they were feeling?
And I've heard a lot of these said.
Mm-hmm.
There's some things.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes.
The one that says don't talk back to police.
Mm-hmm.
I went to Purdue University, this was back in 2001. I had gone to Mass and came home that afternoon. The place, grad house, was a lockdown because Purdue had played Notre Dame. When Purdue played, they burned things up, and so the place was on lockdown. I came back in, and as I swiped my card to get in, got to the elevator, 2 Purdue police walked in, came over to me by the elevator and says, "Come with me." I says, excuse me, come with me. And I says, what for? So I challenged them. I think what you said was to put your hands up and fall. I didn't. I challenged him to the point where the woman behind the desk, the grad assistant, asked what's going on. And I said, they're demanding that I come with them. And she said, it's not her, it's the couple on the chair. There was a young man and a young woman on the chair that they were sitting. This young man had gotten in before the lockdown and was soliciting. And one of the girls in the upper floor called down to the grad house and said, this guy's here getting subscriptions. Should he be on the grad house? And she said, no, come down, wait for him, and I'll call the police. So that's where they were sitting. And rather than the police saying, come with me, he asked the man, were you soliciting? Why was I not given that same opportunity? So if I did not ask what for and challenge him, I perhaps have been hauled off and hung. You would not have known me.
Thank you for sharing. And you wanted to say something?
Yeah, just when you're talking about the police reaction, how privileged I am. I get stopped and they say, thank you, ma'am, and I go on, and that is just very, very different experience than if I'm a person home.
Thank you for sharing. So let's explore the idea of racial socialization being a product of vicarious trauma. On May 25th, 2020, George Floyd, a Black American man, was murdered in Minneapolis by white police officer Derek Chauvin, who held his knee to Floyd's neck while Floyd called out for his mother. Sullivan and colleagues conducted a study on Black and white parents having conversations with their adolescents about race, inequality, and identity pre and post the murder of George Floyd. So these little charts here show the differences that were found. The number of Black parents having these conversations were greater for both pre and post Floyd. Additionally, there was an increase in the number of Black parents having these conversations surrounding topics post Floyd's death, while the number of white parents having these conversations decreased.
Wow.
Similarly, Black parents worried that their children would be targets of bias more than white parents, and Black parental worry increased while white parental worry decreased. And this is both pre and post Floyd as well. The increase in racial socialization and parental worry after the murder of George Floyd is suggestive of the vicarious traumatization of Black parents. So Bryant Davis and colleagues describe police violence against Blacks as a direct, cataclysmic, racial and cultural event. Direct or indirect exposure to these events or other race-based incidents have major psychological consequences. And some of those include depression, anxiety, irritability, hypervigilance, difficulty sleeping, anger, fear, challenges with trust, psychosocial problems, behavioral problems, and somatic problems, and even heightened startle reaction. These factors lead parents to engage in these racial socialization conversations with their children in an effort to prepare and protect them. And many of these symptoms are directly related to vicarious trauma and PTSD symptoms. So, although the goal of racial socialization is almost always to ensure adolescents maintain a positive view of their own race and to promote coping skills for dealing with racism and discrimination, that's not always the case. Wayne and colleagues broke down racial socialization into 4 dimensions: cultural socialization, bias socialization, promotion of trust, and egalitarianism. So cultural socialization refers to parents transmitting messages of cultural pride to their children. Despite cultural socialization being consistently associated with positive psychological outcomes in most research, there is research that suggests otherwise. For example, Tribble and colleagues described gender and skin tone differences that occur in cultural socialization. While male adolescents often experience positive effects, female adolescents, especially those of darker skin, were cited to have poor mental health, poor physical health, lower social economic status, and lower self-esteem. Biased socialization refers to parents discussing experience with racism and discrimination with their adolescents. So whether those are things that they've witnessed or things that they've experienced themselves. Lang and colleagues explained that biased socialization has been seen to produce negative psychological consequences. Those include low self-esteem, lower academic self-efficacy, decreased communication in the mother-child relationship, increased aggression, and evidence of internalized depression. Promotion of mistrust refers to parents encouraging adolescents to approach interracial interactions with distrust or avoidance. Dunbar and colleagues found that promotion of mistrust was linked to increased depression and diminished family cohesion. Egalitarianism refers to the prioritization of commonalities among racial groups. Egalitarianism and racial socialization has rarely been studied, but there is limited research that has been conducted, and it found that egalitarianism socialization is connected to poor mental health outcomes and increased socioeconomic distress. So, when it comes to intervention strategies for Black Americans, I want you all to look at these questions and think about them for a bit. What intervention strategies would you use with a Black adolescent dealing with trauma? And what intervention strategies would you use dealing with a Black adult dealing with trauma? What thoughts does everyone have?
I'd be honest with both the adolescents and the adults about their experience of their trauma. But what you're showing in the previous slides is that can really backfire and be really a negative thing too.
Any other?
It seems like maybe I'm thinking with adolescents, they might be more prone to the negative racial socialization because of social media and being so like blasted with, I'm even thinking about like recently some of the video footage of young Black men being targeted by the police, that would be something that's coming up for them. But for both of these populations, I'm thinking helping them to find aspects of their identity that are positive and empowering, spaces where they do feel like they have control.
Anyone? Yes.
My go-to would be to work somatically to help them regulate their nervous system. To recognise when they become dysregulated.
Yeah. Anyone else?
I might have to start with, to what degree does your trauma come from people who look like me? It's just might not work. I might not be the guy.
A little bit of a different thought for consideration. First of all, I would question that we have the interventions and strategies for either. That's my first starting space. The second space I would go into, I want to be curious about that. The second space I would go into is reminding us that of the complexities and intersectionality of trauma, of all of that, because it's not just about that. This is just the one that you're seeing in this moment. But there's a macrame of trauma. So, and there's also a macrame for how they are contending with all that they're dealing with. So though, like I said, I appreciate the work and whatnot, but I've always learned to be careful before I give them anything else to understand what they already have. Because if I give them anything else, it may leave them vulnerable for what they've already put in place to contend with outside of the world. If that makes sense.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I think it would be hard because the trauma is ongoing. It doesn't stop, so it's really hard to treat or strategize using techniques and dealing with the trauma if it's ongoing. And so that would be my question.
Any other thoughts?
probably spend a lot of time building rapport and trust before going a certain direction that has any type of intervention or
Yes.
healing aspect, because otherwise I have risk of doing more harm.
Yes.
I'd also be curious on if there are places where they feel safe. And what are the components in that safer space? And how do they access that? Just, to sort of balance out the traumatic experiences with, is there a space? And what if there isn't?
That was gonna be my question, and what if there is no
Yeah,
yours?
right. No, and what if there isn't?
If I can too, because with this piece, which I appreciate, is what would happen if we started from the opposite, which is already presuming there is no space where they're feeling safe, because safe also is a complex thing.
Yes.
We're talking psychologically safe, physically safe, spiritually safe. The realities are every single, like anyone else who's been victimized, every time these types of assaults happen, it reactivates, because it could be, driving while black, bird watching while black, So that's what I'm trying to say. So if anything, I want us to, I would want to proceed with caution and just be with them first, because bringing a certain level of conscious intentionality into something right now may be a bit too soon, given the complexities, because it is persistent trauma, and we are part of the system that's traumatizing them.
Yeah.
Because be careful what they say, because it's a whole vicious space. So just being with, I think I like that, and joining and seeing what can be, what emerges from there, because they'll guide us.
Otherwise you risk tying the neck tighter, or the knot tighter instead of helping loosen it.
Exactly.
Regarding safe spaces, I know that ABSI has created cell bone and healing circles, and generally the Black culture turns to community in times of grief, in times of need, things like that. So that could always be somewhere that clients could be referred, where they might feel a safe space.
Some intervention strategies that I think would be helpful is taking a humanistic approach
To multicultural therapy, focusing on that empathy, building a relationship, checking our biases and things like that, and being aware of how our biases show up in the room when we're with clients of different cultures.
Also,
Black feminist therapy, when working with Black adolescent women or Black adult women, can be helpful. It focuses on liberation, on empowerment, and centers the Black woman's lived experience and how all the intersecting identities of race, gender, sex, culture, and all of those things play into the lives of, in the lived experience of being a Black woman. So Black feminist therapy can be really helpful in that aspect. And then, so, in summary, race-based trauma, people in Black culture experience this on a regular basis. It doesn't necessarily have to be one event, it can be multiple events compounding on top of each other.
regarding racial socialization,
It definitely is a protective factor and can prepare Black adolescents for experiences with racism and discrimination, but there are also negative impacts and negative psychological effects of it.
and
That's where vicarious trauma comes in, when Black parents or caregivers are experiencing these experiences over and over and over again. It impacts the way they give these messages to their children and how their children receives them. And so this is definitely an area that needs future research, and how racial socialization and vicarious trauma are connected. Thank you.